A reading from 2 Kings chapter 7. Elisha answered, "Listen to what the Lord says. By this time tomorrow you will be able to buy in Samaria 10 pounds of the best wheat or 20 pounds of barley for 1 piece of silver." The personal attendant of the king said to Elisha, "That can't happen, not even if the Lord himself were to send grain at once. You will see it happen, but you won't get to eat any of the food." Elisha replied. 4 men who were suffering from a dreaded skin disease were outside the gates of Samaria, and they said to each other, "Why should we wait here until we die? It's no use going into the city because we would starve to death in there, but if we stay here, we'll die also. So let's go to the Syrian camp. The worst they can do is kill us, but maybe they will spare our lives." So as it began to get dark, they went to the Syrian camp, but when they reached it, no one was there. The Lord had made the Syrians hear what sounded like the advance of a large army with horses and chariots, and the Syrians thought that the king of Israel had hired Hittite and Egyptian kings and their armies to attack them. So that evening, the Syrians had fled for their lives, abandoning their tents, horses and donkeys, and leaving the camp just as it was. When the 4 men reached the edge of the camp, they went into a tent, ate and drank what was there, grabbed the silver, gold, and clothing they found, and went off and hid them. Then they returned, entered another tent, and did the same thing. But then they said to each other, "We shouldn't be doing this. We have good news, and we shouldn't keep it to ourselves. If we wait until morning to tell it, we are sure to be punished. Let's go right now and tell the king's officers." So they left the Syrian camp, went back to Samaria, and called out to the guards at the gates. "We went to the Syrian camp and didn't see or hear anybody. The horses and donkeys have not been untied, and the tents are just as the Syrians left them." The guards announced the news, and it was reported in the palace. It was still night, but the king got out of bed and said to his officials, "I'll tell you what the Syrians are planning. They know about the famine here, so they have left their camp to go and hide in the countryside. They think that we will leave the city to find food, and then they will take us alive and capture the city." One of his officials said, "The people here in the city are doomed anyway, like those that have already died. So let's send some men with 5 of the horses that are left so that we can find out what has happened." They chose some men, and the king sent them in 2 chariots with instructions to go and find out what had happened to the Syrian army. The men went as far as the Jordan, and all along the road they saw the clothes and equipment that the Syrians had abandoned as they fled. Then they returned and reported to the king. The people of Samaria rushed out and looted the Syrian camp, and, as the Lord had said, 10 pounds of the best wheat or 20 pounds of barley were sold for 1 piece of silver. It so happened that the king of Israel had put the city gate under the command of the officer who was his personal attendant. The officer was trampled to death there by the people and died, as Elisha had predicted when the king went to see him. Elisha had told the king that by that time the following day 10 pounds of the best wheat or 20 pounds of barley would be sold in Samaria for 1 piece of silver, to which the officer had answered, "That can't happen, not even if the Lord himself were to send grain at once." And Elisha had replied, "You will see it happen, but you won't get to eat any of the food." And that is just what happened to him. He died, trampled to death by the people at the city gate. The word of the Lord. A reading from 2 Kings chapter 8. Now Elisha had told the woman who lived in Shunem, whose son he had brought back to life, that the Lord was sending a famine on the land which would last for 7 years, and that she should leave with her family and go and live somewhere else. She had followed his instructions and had gone with her family to live in Philistia for the 7 years. At the end of the 7 years, she returned to Israel and went to the king to ask that her house and her land be restored to her. She found the king talking with Gehazi, Elisha's servant. The king wanted to know about Elisha's miracles. While Gehazi was telling the king how Elisha had brought a dead person back to life, the woman made her appeal to the king. Gehazi said to him, "Your Majesty, here is the woman, and here is her son whom Elisha brought back to life." In answer to the king's question, she confirmed Gehazi's story, and so the king called an official and told him to give back to her everything that was hers, including the value of all the crops that her fields had produced during the 7 years she had been away. Elisha went to Damascus at a time when King Ben-Hadad of Syria was sick. When the king was told that Elisha was there, he said to Hazael, one of his officials, "Take a gift to the prophet and ask him to consult the Lord to find out whether or not I am going to get well." So Hazael loaded 40 camels with all kinds of the finest products of Damascus and went to Elisha. When Hazael met him, he said, "Your servant King Ben-Hadad has sent me to ask you whether or not he will recover from his sickness." Elisha answered, "The Lord has revealed to me that he will die. But go to him and tell him that he will recover." Then Elisha stared at him with a horrified look on his face until Hazael became ill at ease. Suddenly, Elisha burst into tears. "Why are you crying, sir?" Hazael asked. "Because I know the horrible things you will do against the people of Israel," Elisha answered. "You will set their fortresses on fire, slaughter their finest young men, batter their children to death, and rip open their pregnant women." "How could I ever be that powerful?" Hazael asked. "I am a nobody." "The Lord has shown me that you will be king of Syria," Elisha replied. Hazael went back to Ben-Hadad, who asked him, "What did Elisha say?" "He told me that you would certainly get well," Hazael answered. But on the following day, Hazael took a blanket, soaked it in water, and smothered the king. And Hazael succeeded Ben-Hadad as king of Syria. In the 5th year of the reign of Joram, son of Ahab, as king of Israel, Jehoram, son of Jehoshaphat, became king of Judah at the age of 32, and he ruled in Jerusalem for 8 years. His wife was Ahab's daughter, and like the family of Ahab, he followed the evil ways of the king kings of Israel. He sinned against the Lord, but the Lord was not willing to destroy Judah because he had promised his servant David that his descendants would always continue to rule. During Jehoram's reign, Edom revolted against Judah and became an independent kingdom. So Jehoram set out with all his chariots to Zair, where the Edomite army surrounded them. During the night, he and his chariot commanders managed to break out and escape, and his soldiers scattered to their homes. Edom has been independent of Judah ever since. During the same period, the city of Libnah also revolted. Everything else that Jehoram did is recorded in the history of the kings of Judah. Jehoram died and was buried in the royal tombs in David's city, and his son Ahaziah succeeded him as king. In the 12th year of the reign of Joram, son of Ahab, as king of Israel, Ahaziah, son of Jehoram, became king of Judah at the age of 22, and he ruled in Jerusalem for 1 year. His mother was Athaliah, the daughter of King Ahab and granddaughter to King Omri of Israel. Since Ahaziah was related to King Ahab by marriage, he sinned against the Lord just as Ahab's family did. King Ahaziah joined King Joram of Israel in a war against King Hazael of Syria. The armies clashed at Ramoth in Gilead, and Joram was wounded in battle. He returned to the city of Jezreel to recover from his wounds, and Ahaziah went there to visit him. The word of the Lord.